In my last video, The Superlative Among Superlatives, I said humans possess mentality as a superlative trait at an order of magnitude that is far greater than other animals possess their superlative traits. Some people have responded to that either directly or indirectly through their responses to Professor Anton, who spoke favorably of my video. The concern seems to be, and it's a concern that some of them have expressed before, that if we acknowledge that human beings have some comparative advantageous trait to a superlative degree, then we are somehow saying that human beings are better than other animals. Please note, these people are not the least bit concerned if it happens to be true that human beings have some comparative advantageous trait to a superlative degree. Instead, they are apparently concerned about how admitting and exploring the ramifications of this truth might rank non-human animals on some imagined chain of being. They are more concerned about avoiding speciesism than they are with what the empirical facts tell us. Now, I want to talk about the utterly ridiculous notion that there is a chain of being a little later in this video. But before we get into that, in other matters, let me say this first. There is a sense in which human beings are better than non-human animals. They are better at doing those tasks that are concomitant with and a consequence of a mental life. Now, if anyone wishes to deny this, then perhaps they can defend, for example, how a baboon or some other animal is as likely to solve a higher math problem than a human being, because such a preposterous position would result from denying that human beings possess a mental acuity that is superlative to other animals. Now, unless these people wish to persist in seeming obviously absurd, then I think they should concede that humans are, and here comes the word, better than non-human animals at rationality. But notice how conceding that doesn't mean that human beings are better in every respect than non-human animals. Many non-human animals have lots of capacities to a greater degree than humans, so much so that humans seem primitive in contrast. For example, the olfactory abilities of some animals are so keen that they make ours seem handicapped, if not vestigial, in contrast. Notice also that acknowledging the empirical fact that human beings have a comparative advantageous trait that is superlative compared to other animals does not entail that human beings are somehow ontologically superior to other animals. I find it mystifying that some people fear this is the so-called conclusion if we admit that human beings are better than other animals at something. I find it mystifying for two reasons. First, ontological superiority doesn't follow from differences. I'm not ontologically inferior to a basketball player because I can't dunk a basketball, but he can. Likewise, the basketball player isn't ontologically inferior to me because I can read Willard Quine with understanding and he cannot. To think otherwise is to engage in a non sequitur. Now, I might value understanding Quine over dunking a basketball, but that has nothing to do with ontological superiority. That has to do with personal preference. There are also species preferences, which is why, except in a few aberrant cases, humans and aardvarks don't try to mate with each other. But just because I prefer my species over aardvarks doesn't mean that humans are ontologically superior to aardvarks. The second reason I find this mystifying is because I don't know what ontological superiority even means. Ontological superiority is not a datum one can see in the world. It is not, as I hope I just demonstrated, a conclusion one can draw from the differing comparative advantages that species possess. What the hell does it mean? Well, it has had a meaning of sorts in the history of Western thought. It is here that we should talk about the so-called chain of being. I suspect that those who wish to either deny or denigrate any significance to the differences between humans and other animals believe that it was precisely the observation of differences that led to the conclusion that humans had ontological superiority over animals. But nothing could be further from the case, as any review of the history of the notion will demonstrate. The idea of the chain of being had its origin in the thought of Plato, with his division between forms and sensible things. Plotinus, himself a Platonist, formalized the notion of a chain of being with his theory of divine emanations. All of this, of course, was picked up by Augustine and other early Christian thinkers, and they created an explicit hierarchy or chain of being that placed God above humanity and humanity above animals. What is important to note is that the Platonists and the early Christians posited ontological superiority and a chain of being not because of empirical observations, but because of theoretical and doctrinal considerations. In other words, their theories and doctrines required them to posit ontological superiority in a chain of being, not their observations. Once they declare the reality of ontological superiority in a chain of beings, then they cast about for confirming evidence. But what I am suggesting is categorically different from that kind of approach. I have no theoretical or doctrinal axe to grind. I'm in effect asking, what is it that we observe about and rationally conclude from the differences between humans and other animals? Well, we conclude that there are differences. We observe that some of these differences are advantageous traits. We observe that some animals possess their advantageous traits to a superlative degree. We observe and conclude that the human animal possesses its superlative trait at an order of magnitude that is far greater than other animals possess their superlative traits. Notice, nowhere in this list of innocuous but trippingly obvious observations and conclusions is there a hint about ontological superiority in a chain of being. So to suggest that what I've said leads invariably to a notion of ontological superiority in a chain of being is simply a bum rap. There is nothing to fear from telling the truth that human beings possess a superlative trait at an order of magnitude that is far greater than other animals possess their superlative traits. Now, in my next video, I want to take up the argument that some have proffered. The argument made that humanity's comparative advantageous trait can't be superlative because it can and has led to some evil actions, at times on a catastrophic scale. Thank you.